So, without further delay, sir, please take this microphone away from me.
Now you got this one. Oh, what a treat. And those of you that are watching on Zoom, that camera is kind of looking at my nose, and I'm not that fat. It adds like 15 pounds. But so nice to see all of you on Zoom. And then those of you that are watching us via, I don't know what we're on, what we'll be on with this one, but I'm so glad you joined us. And so it's my treat. The last time I was here, Father Mark and I worked together on a Lenten series all week long, and it was fabulous. We had such a blast with your people, and we saw just the potential of when Christians come together in unity around the Lord Jesus Christ. We have so much more in common than we have in difference, and it's just so important that, especially as we have a vision and a passion for not only our city of Livermore, but actually the San Francisco Bay Area and the whole world. Thanks to the internet, and actually thanks to COVID, the church has become very much internet savvy, and even your church here has a wonderful studio and great, talented people helping you take the ministry of this church way farther than the boundaries of this church property. And that's what's so important. The church has to get outside of its own property and just have a vision that really includes people all over the world. So we're praying for your ministry, and we ask that you keep praying for ours. When you come over by Costco in Livermore, you'll see our largest campus. So say a prayer our way if you would, and we'll do the same with you. So I want to talk to you about dads. I love the topic that I was given. I want to show you a picture, if I can make this thing work. This is my mom and dad on their anniversary, and just a beautiful couple. My dad has his bib on because we're having barbecue there, and he was planning on just getting real sloppy. But so that's mom and dad. This is dad in their apartment there in Florida, and that picture really sums up dad. He's been retired now for a while after a 50-year career pastoring churches and leading his denomination in Colorado and Kansas. He just turned 89. Dad has many strengths, and like all of us, a few weaknesses. I'll point out a few of his strengths, and I hope he forgives me for even revealing a few of his weaknesses to you. But Dad is an eternal optimist, as you can see on his face, and I don't know if those of you watching can see him, but he's just always got that look. As a matter of fact, if you ever get negative around my dad, he'll correct you and take the conversation to a positive place. He hates gossip. He hates anyone being criticized. And he wants you to feel good about yourself. And he will do whatever he can to make that happen. I grew up with this kind of an encouraging person. A natural-born leader, a creative risk taker, and faithful to the church. His love for God and for God's people was always evident to me even as a little boy. He was good at leading the church into spiritual health and actually even financial health, as he helped people get their own personal finances in order, and then they gave back to the mission of the church. And wherever he would go, he would make it a point to make sure the bills of the church were paid, the facilities were paid off as they moved forward. So the businessmen in the church really enjoyed my dad because he never called presumption faith, but he was a man of faith, and he challenged people to partner with him. And Dad was also very faithful, or is also very faithful to our family, faithful to my mom, but also faithful to us kids. And the number one way he was faithful to us was by spending time with us. And that would probably be my number one point tonight. You can spend all the money in the world giving your kids and your grandkids stuff, but really what they just want is you. And they want to hang out with you. They want to know that you're interested in them. And my dad was great at that. My dad loved vacation. We didn't have a lot of money, so they weren't expensive vacations. And we lived in Colorado. So that's a great place to live if you need a cheap vacation. And my folks weren't really into camping. And so early on, a friend of theirs sold him a tiny cabin, I think it's about 800 square foot cabin in western Colorado, for $2,000. And my whole life, we owned a cabin. And a $2,000 cabin, an uninsulated cabin, a cabin with no heat except for a potbelly stove, a 2-bedroom cabin where I slept on the couch in the living room, but nevertheless a place for us to have countless vacations. We'd load up our Rambler, whether we were living there in Pueblo, Colorado, or Lawrence, Kansas, or Littleton, Colorado, and across we would go western Colorado in that Rambler and unload it, and then the cabin would be our home base for a week or two every summer, and then sometimes longer. And we'd go down to Fruta for the Cherry Festival, over to trying to think even, there was a peach festival, a cherry festival, and now Colorado, western Colorado is all vineyards. Back then it was orchards, and we would just have a great time. And then we'd grab some of that fresh fruit, come back to the cabin. We had a hand crank ice cream maker, and we'd have homemade ice cream there. And of course, fresh trout all the time caught in the Rockies. The cabin could get cold even on summer nights, and the only heat was the potbelly stove. So every night, the last thing my dad did was to bank that fire. And if you know anything about fires that you want to keep going during the night, you know what I mean when you say bank the fire. And my dad would bank the fire so that it would stay hot clear into the night, and we'd snuggle in under our quilts and go to bed. By the time morning hit, though, the cabin was pretty cold. Dad would be first one up, rustling around, get that potbelly stove going again, crackling, and within 10 minutes of him lighting that match, the whole cabin was warm, and we would start our day. With Dad and I would always go fishing. My sisters weren't really into fishing much, so that gave me private time with my dad, and I do not know how many weeks I have spent every morning on the Grand Mesa, Colorado, fishing, Barren Lake, Black Lake, other lakes there, and then come home for a late breakfast with the family. We'd have a mess of trout, and my mom would put on the potatoes, the onions, fresh bread, and we'd have an 11 or 12 o'clock breakfast, and then that would start our day. So that's a good vacation, by the way. You can take your kids to Disneyland and spend thousands of dollars, or you can just go to a $2,000 unheated cabin in the mountains, and I'll take that second one every time. And to this day, the tug of a fish on the line reminds me of my dad, and just great memories. Now, as a boy, I watched this guy parent us 3 kids. I have 2 sisters. My youngest sister was really easy to parent. My oldest sister was a little more difficult, and I'm sure I was as well. My oldest sister struggled with self-esteem issues, and I'm not sure why, because she was raised by the same parents who raised me, but Sherry always struggled to feel good about herself. And I remember once I finally started getting my head out of my own behind and realizing that there's a world of people around you that need your love, I saw how my dad would love my sister and how he would draw out in her self-image, self-esteem, self-respect, and really protect her from, just from a girl who doesn't have self-esteem and where that might lead her. My dad was always protecting her, loving her. And even to this day, my sister now is mid to late 60s, and she still has a really neat relationship with, she calls him Daddy. And they're in Florida now. My mom and dad, my dad lives in assisted living, and my sister and my mom visit him every day. And I just see my sister with my dad, and it's just very, very rewarding. I was just with them last week, and just to see Sherry make over him and love him and how he responds to his daughter. I raised 3 sons. I never had a daughter. Those of you that have had daughters, you know that that's a special relationship between a father and a daughter. As a parent, now a grandparent, I think often about all that I learned from my dad. And of course, you learn more from what you watch than by what your dad says. And you learn more just by observing everything. Most things that are learned are caught, but not taught. And so I learned some great things. And I think, as you can tell, I never doubted his love for me. Having said all that, and I know he'll never watch this, so I'll just tell you, my dad wasn't perfect. And I'll just tell you a few things about him. Nothing real drastic, but one thing was he hated to lose. He hated to lose anything. Ping pong, caroms, card games, dominoes, you name it. I learned as a little kid, if I wanted to keep my dad at the table, I let him win. I actually would let my dad win games. And I forgot to tell my son, 6-year-old Tyler, when we were on vacation, oh, by the way, let Grandpa win or he'll quit playing. And my son was killing him at cards. And my dad, after about a half an hour of that, decided to do something else, threw the cards down, stomped out, and left. And Tyler looked at me like, what did I do wrong? And I said, I should have warned you. And he had a bit of a short fuse, especially if you questioned his authority or sassed him. He stood all of 5'7", but I know if I messed with the bull, I got the horns. And so that was pretty regular with me because I was pretty much a little smartass. Dad was somewhat impatient. He often gave up on things too easily. I've seen him try to fix something for about 8 minutes. And if he couldn't fix it, he'd throw the tools down, walk out, and just leave whatever it was for one of us to figure out. I actually learned how to fix things after my dad would tear it apart, and then I would figure out how to fix it. To this day, I try to fix stuff around and all the kinds of stuff my dad never taught me because he didn't have the patience to do that. Also, I've never heard my dad say he is sorry. To this day, I've never heard my dad say he is sorry. To my mom, to anyone. He doesn't apologize. The way he apologizes is after he knows he's blown it, he's quiet for a little while. You can tell he's reflecting on it. And then he's just really nice to you for a couple of days. And then you're supposed to just drop it. And if you drop it, you end up getting, maybe a little extra ice cream or a little extra something. But that's his way of saying sorry. Having said all that, I've always known that when it came to dads, I got a good one. I could see easily how a few of my friends gravitated toward my dad, and he became their dad as well. My roommate in college, David, was one of those that pointed this out to me. Your dad's really wonderful. And his dad had abandoned the family when he was a boy, and without divorcing his mom, just decided to get another wife and raise another family in another town. And so David was very bitter about that when he found out Dad's not coming back. Dad's got another wife and even another son. So my dad saw that in David, and I saw him reach out to him. And even to this day, they have a really wonderful relationship. So the topic tonight, being the kid your dad, being the dad your children deserve. But before we go any further, I think it'd be good for us to open up our table discussions, because tonight is a bit of me talking and then a bit of you talking. And so one of the beautiful things about a church that meets around tables is that we can talk to each other. And so I'm going to lead you in a bit of a discussion. And the reason is that I'm sure there's some great dads in the room. And I think that we can all learn from each other. But I would say if your table is a little light, maybe just these two tables, if you could get together and be in one table, that'd be great because your discussion will be more gratifying. I see 3 guys at this table, and that's fine if you want to stay with the 3, but if you want to join these 4 guys, that's fine as well. You decide, and I'm going to put the discussion questions up now, and then I'm going to put you under a break where we're going to talk about these 6 things. Okay, so you look over it, you make sure everyone at your table knows your name, and then talk about your dad. What was he like when you were growing up? And on each of these questions, each guy doesn't have to answer all of them, especially if you're an introvert. If you're an introvert, you can just sit and listen because there's somebody at your table that loves to talk. By the way, how many of you are kind of more introverted? You're an introvert. Anybody? Okay, no, not true. You wouldn't have raised your hand if that was true. I'm teasing you there. But go ahead, talk about your dad. What was he like? Talk about your children and your grandchildren. How's your relationship with them today? What do you think? You know what? What do you think you did right as a dad? And how could you have done better? You're not going to cover all 6 of those, so you can just pick one. But the idea is for us to get talking. And I'll pull you back together in about 10 minutes. Ready, go. All right, guys, let's talk about all the great dads in the Bible. All the great dads. Well, you would think that the Bible would have some great examples of great dads, but it absolutely does not. I mean, St. Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, of course. But honestly, we know very little about this guy. And So you would think the Bible would offer us great role models, but that's absolutely not the case. We're hard pressed to find even one dad other than Joseph in the Bible who really performed well and didn't have a big failure attached to some success. Let me give you some examples. Book of Genesis, God tells Abraham that he's going to be the father of countless children. But Abraham and Sarah are old age, and even for years after God told him that, they still didn't conceive. And so Abraham and Sarah took it into their own hands, and Sarah delivered her maid Hagar to Abraham's tent, and Abraham and Hagar conceived Ishmael, which was great. Abraham had a son. The Bible says that he loved his son, but then his wife Sarah produced Isaac, and that created a really not good stress between Sarah and Hagar. And so Abraham told Sarah, well, do whatever you want. So she turned Hagar and Hagar's son, which is Abraham's son, out, and they abandoned them into the desert. So you could ask Ishmael if he thought Abraham was a good dad as Ishmael was entering his teenage years, and I think you would know the answer. So Abraham's son with his wife Sarah was Isaac. Isaac grew up, and he and his wife Rebekah had two sons, twins, Jacob and Esau. Esau was dad's favorite. He was a hunter. He was outdoorsy. He was kind of a man's man. Jacob was more domestic. He loved to cook. He loved to hang out with his mom in the kitchen. And he was mom's favorite. Then when Isaac was getting old, Jacob and mom Rebekah tricked the old man into giving Jacob the inheritance instead of giving it to Esau. And when Esau found out that what Jacob had done, he had to run for his life. So literally playing favorites in that family split the family. So you would think that when Jacob became a father, he would know what it was like when dad played favorites. So you would think that Jacob wouldn't play favorites, but he did. And that's Joseph's dad. And you may know the story of Joseph, how his brothers were so jealous of dad's attention and affection that they sold their brother to Egyptian slave traders, who put Joseph in Egypt for the rest of his life. And these stories are terrible, and we aren't even out of Genesis yet. But you keep going through the Old Testament, you're just not going to find good parenting. Now, there is a good parenting book where a father writes an entire book of the Bible to his son, giving him advice, and that's the book of Proverbs. And if there is a men's group that's looking for a book to study in regards to parenting, Proverbs would be a good father-son Bible study where the father gives the son wisdom and passes it down. It'd be better for all of us fathers and grandfathers to crack our own Bibles and read the book of Proverbs. And those of us that have adult children, for us to say, hey, I'm studying the book of Proverbs. Would you like to talk about that together? I know so many of us would love to see our children and our grandchildren back in church. And one way to do that would be to make your home into a little bit more of a church and to just say, hey, listen, I would love for you to come to church, but if not, we're going to... in our home, we're going to crack our Bibles a little more, and I'm going to lead us this year in a little bit of a study in Proverbs. It's not going to be a big, long thing, and I'm not going to be pointing the finger, but I am going to be the spiritual leader as grandpa or dad, and we're going to do a little Bible study together. And some of your kids will respond negatively to that, but a lot of them will be maybe shocked or just maybe pleased because they know you already are like that. But I would encourage you to do that. So let's just, for example, let's look at Proverbs 3 for a few minutes and see the parenting example here. Proverbs 3:1, my child, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. For length of days and years of life and abundant welfare they will give you. Do not let loyalty and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And so let's go back then and just look at what he just said. He said, don't forget my teaching. Let your heart keep my commands, for the commands, it says, will prolong your life and give you prosperity. So a wise father gives advice that will last a lifetime. The father knows how to get inside the child's head. he said, don't forget my teaching. But what happens when your child grows up and is not in your home? What happens when your child's out when they get their driver's license and you don't see them for a weekend? What happens? Are you inside their head when they're with their friends, when they're with their girlfriend, when they're out and the temptations are there? The important thing is that the child is still hearing the father's voice. And my dad was pretty good at this, by the way. Dad and mom both. My dad would say, I'd be getting ready to go out to be with my friends, and I knew some of the stuff that was going on that night that probably my parents wouldn't be completely approving of. And my dad knew that stuff too, because he had been a teenager about 25 years earlier. So before I'd go out the door, he'd go, oh, wait, come here. And he'd say, now, you need a little extra money for tonight? You need a little extra? And he might have $5 for me or something, just to be kind. And then he'd say, now listen, and he'd hold the money and not give it to me, and I'd try to pull it. He'd go, whoa, wait. He goes, remember who you are tonight, son. And boy, he'd get inside my head. And I'd be at a party and my friends would offer me some kind of libation. And my dad's voice would say, well, remember who you are. I'd be out on a date with a girl and we'd be out on some dark country road and the voice of my dad, remember who you are. Remember who you are. Went off to college with my dad's voice in my head. And that's an important thing. We need to haunt our children until the day we die and even after with remember who you are. So let's say that phrase together as if we're saying it to our kid. Remember who you are. All right, excellent. My dad, like the father in Proverbs, also gave me great advice about money. Proverbs has some great advice about relationships, about foolish behavior, about substance abuse, about money. And my dad taught me a principle, an 80-10-10 principle about money. They would give me an allowance, and later on, if I wanted more money, I had to work for it around the house. And then, of course, later on, I got jobs as I was growing up. But my dad taught me the 80-10-10 principle about money. He says, now, 10% of that money I'd love to see you giving to the church, to the poor. I'd love to see you give $1 out of 10 and share that with somebody else or share that with your church or the mission of the church. That's 10% of your money. So 10% of your money doesn't belong to you. He says the other 10% of your money is going to belong to you later, but I want you to save it. We're going to open up a savings account for you. Later on as an adult, it was my dad that taught me about 401ks, retirement, and compound interest, which is such a blessing. And he said, delay gratification, 10% of everything you make for your whole life, you need to put away to the future. Now that I'm looking at retirement coming up, I'm so grateful for the advice from my dad because thanks to his advice, I'll be able to retire because I was putting money away my whole life. The other 80%, he said, son, just be wise, but spend that. Have fun with it. Invest it if you want, do whatever you want, but if you go 80-10-10, you're going to do great with your money. These are the kind of things that we teach our children. All right, let's look at what else the Proverbs dad said. Proverbs 3, my child, don't forget my teaching. Now, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. So a wise father teaches the son or the daughter, even though they give them wisdom and they teach them to lean on their gifting and their intelligence and their physical strength, at the end of the day, he says, but you can't completely rely on that. You have a God that you can rely on, so I want you in everything you do, say, act, think, I want you to acknowledge God, and God will reward you by straightening out your paths. So a wise father works on that child, works with the school system, works with other relatives, make sure there's enough adults in that child's life, and then works with the church, the priest and the pastor. So a wise father doesn't drop his kids off at church. A wise father takes his kids to church. And as you're sitting there in the mass, or as they're sitting in some class or whatever, or some event that the church has, your relationship is being bonded around the church and around the Lord Jesus Christ, which is a very, very healthy thing. My dad was a spiritual leader of our home. In a lot of homes today, it's the women that are spiritual leaders, and the men kind of sit back. And I think that Some of the state of our children these days is because the men have sat back too much and just basically relinquished that role just to their wives. It's a partnership, and my wife and I both poured heavily into our children in spiritual ways. We tried to make things about God enjoyable, fun, not boring. Conversations about God, we kept them. It wasn't too long, wasn't too prayer times, all that. But from early on, praying with kids at bedtime, praying with kids at meals, and then just talking about the Lord a lot. And, I was raised by parents like that. I think I'm actually a believer today because I saw authentic Christianity lived out at home. Let's look at what else that he said there. Proverbs 3:7, do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. He's talking to his child. Don't get arrogant. Don't depend too much on your own wisdom. Don't think you're all that. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing for your flesh and refreshment for your body. So I became a father and then a grandfather. And as that happened, I was fortunate to have my own father and my wife's father as great blessings and role models. But we know that not everyone watching and not everyone in this room live was that lucky. And maybe your father wasn't the best influence. I know at our table, we were talking about how a couple of guys at our table have actually had to kind of learn it on their own and do maybe a little bit even of the opposite of what their dad did. And that's what these men are doing at our table. I noticed they were breaking a chain. And the Bible's all about the Holy Spirit helping you break a chain. If there's bad parenting in your past, you're not cursed to be a bad parent. The Holy Spirit will help you to break that chain as you raise your own children. But then the question lies, there's guys of us in the room that all of our children are grown, and now we've got grandchildren. Some of you have grandchildren that are in college. So what if your children are adults today? Is it too late to parent them? And the answer is absolutely not. You're still inside their head. You still have more influence over them than you think. Now you have to guard how you say what you say, because now you're talking to an adult. But nevertheless, they still want to know what you think, and you can still influence that child. So one of the joys of my life is that I get to see my sons as dads, and my 3 sons are all terrific fathers, and one of my sons is with me tonight, and I've actually asked Kevin if he would join me and share some of his thoughts as how he reflects on how he was raised. So if we could get Kevin a microphone, and Kevin, come up and just stand by me so those that are watching can see your face. And if you don't mind, I just want to ask you a few questions. First of all, how do you think I'm doing tonight? Do you feel like I did okay?
B-.
Okay.
I'd say. Definitely.
All right. Well, that's better than what you said last time.
That's pretty good.
That's great. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, when you think of our relationship, what could you say to these guys? How do you continue to parent a parent? How do you continue to parent your son when he's an adult?
It's crazy. I feel like I was reflecting on that today because I knew we were going to talk, and I feel like there was this, I don't know, like a really like distinct time when I can remember like some pretty intentional conversations that you and I even had, and I want to say it was like somewhere between 17 and 20, sort of like variations on this, and I remember when it shifted from you, and I'm going to say this lovingly because I'm exactly like this as a dad, leading with advice a lot. Mm-hmm. I find myself doing this to my kids, and sometimes I can see them, like their eyes literally glaze over, and I'm like, I'm going to keep going because I still have stuff to say. I don't care if you can hear it or not. This is a teaching moment. And as they're like kind of backing out of the room, like, Dad's still talking. I feel like there was a lot of, when you love somebody and you know more than them, which is the position you've always been in with me, mm-hmm. You have something you want to share. But I remember when we got to the stage when you would start saying, hey, is it okay if I give you advice right now? Mm-hmm. And I remember a couple moments when at first I felt like I just had, like that was just you saying, I'm going to give you some advice right now. But I'd like to create the illusion of you. But I remember a couple times when I was like, no. And I remember when you were like, okay. And I was like,
Power.
it worked. But then I remember what that did for me is it didn't make me go, great, now I can tune my dad out forever. And what it actually made me do is go, no. And then you went, okay. And then I was like, but like what?
Yeah, if you were going to
give me some advice.
Yeah.
And I feel like that transition where slowly I think you were giving me more and more agency over my own life, over my own decisions. And because you weren't smothering me, it made me like continue to lean in. And I mean, I'm 36, and sometimes it annoys me how much I still want your approval or how much I still need it, and it works out great because I always know that I have it.
Right, but it is important for you to say that to all of these men, because sometimes we don't feel like that child still needs our approval because they come for it in interesting ways. But you're saying that never ended. You need my approval.
No, yeah, 100%. And I'm not going to be the little kid who wears his heart on his sleeve so obviously, where it's like, Dad, let me show you this drawing. Aren't you proud of me? But like those feelings are still there.
Right.
There's a reason where, how was your day? And I'm going to like kind of coyly brag about some cool thing that happened at work because it's like,
yeah,
cool, right, Dad?
So just so you know, I was just with my mom, and I'm 64 now, and I was still doing
I
that.
bet you were.
Yeah. So I don't think that ever ends, and I don't think it's ever supposed to. And so that's a good thought. Second thought, you've got 3 children. What would you say a grandchild needs from grandpa?
I mean, you referenced this in the first talk, but I think that when you're little, what you mostly need, like we talk a lot about quality time. I think when they're little, like quality time is overrated. I think it's all about quantity time because you don't know when quality time is going to happen. And so you just have to lean in with quantity time and go, maybe you're going to be in a weird mood today. My 10-year-old, maybe, like I was just hanging out with my son all weekend and we're just walking and it's quiet for a second. I'm like, hey, is there anything you've been wanting to talk to me about? Just like super open-ended question. And he's quiet for a second. And he's like, actually, yeah. And then there's just like 4 weird interactions with friends that he had at school. And it's like because we had just hung out for a couple hours and he felt like, so I think to that question, like I think they just need a lot of your time and they need to know that you want to be with them and you're not doing it as some perfunctory, like I should spend time with my grandkids. Like they just want to be wanted. They want to be pursued and known and accepted. And like, I want you to know, like, I don't just want to know that you love me. I want to know that you like me.
Yeah.
You, like, think I'm interesting.
You used to try to tell jokes and we used to laugh at whatever you did. And then as you got older, we would pull back. And if it wasn't really funny, we would just tell you that's not funny.
Yeah.
And then you would just keep trying. And we basically manipulated you into being funny.
I do this with Gideon now.
Yeah.
He'll make a joke and then he'll make it again. And I'll go, that was funny the first time. It was boring the second time.
Yeah.
And he looks at me like, ah.
Or if he always leans into, potty talk or whatever, you're like, no, that's potty talk. That's low bar. I want you to make me laugh.
Be creative.
Yeah. That's really cool.
So let me just preempt something you were saying earlier when you were talking about your dad saying, remember who you are. So this is like being raised by a dad who's a Bible teacher who once took 15 months to go through the book of Ephesians, some absurdly long amount of time, where I feel like now my brain is trained when there's like a phrase to literally go word by word, because this guy would do 45 minutes on a word, like circa 1997 at the Amish Shrine Center in Livermore. So when you were saying, remember who you are, which is like such a powerful thing to say to somebody, I was just like breaking it down in my head. Because like when your dad says, remember who you are, what's implied in that is you already know who you are. I'm not telling you to discover who you are. I'm telling you to remember who you are. And that means we've spent so much time together discovering who you are together that you actually already know. So I'm not asking you to be creative and figure something out. I'm asking you to remember something you already know. And that who piece, like there's this identity that you have and who you are as a person. And then that you is like, I'm not asking you to remember who he is or who I am. I'm asking you to remember who you are. And I think implied in that, there's so much, like when I think about what I'm supposed to do as a dad and what you and mom have like modeled for me in parenting is like I believe that the image of God is present in each one of my kids in a unique way. That's like deeply embedded in my theology, is that God is in them. And that it's my job to help them discover what is divine in them. And it's going to look different in my oldest son from my second son and into my daughter. And I feel like you and mom have done that for all of us. Like me and Andy and Tyler are super, super different people with very different expressions of what is divine in all of us. And then, so that you piece being like, remember who you are, Steve, what makes you you. So when you're at that party, because it's not just like sin avoidance, it's also like, you're also somebody who looks for who is having a hard time. That's my oldest kid, Gideon. Like always, if someone in the room, if one of you was like having a hard day, Gideon would have like found you by now and would just kind of be like, how are you? And he's 9 years old. It's just who he is. And Josie, my 5-year-old, would have tackled you by now because she would have sensed that same thing and gone, he needs to wrestle because that's what I need when I'm having a hard day.
And Julie would have asked to borrow your iPhone.
And Julie would have asked to borrow some sort of technology and probably fixed your phone for you.
Yeah.
But anyway, like that you piece, and then even it's like, it's not who you were or who you're going to be. It's like who you already are, even if you make a mistake or even if you have a great day. And like that, I don't know, that remember who you are thing is powerful, and I'm going to steal it.
Kevin, that's great. Help me walk these guys through 1 Corinthians. Oh, this is our family.
Oh, yeah, this is us.
So this is our family several years ago at Tyler's wedding. Tyler's the one with the hat on, and Kevin's down there at the end. But
that's Gideon that I'm holding. That's Julian that my wife is holding.
So that's a while back, because that little guy in your arms is now 9 years old. All right. The Apostle Paul gave us this, 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, and so forth and so on. Before we go into our last discussion group, I want us to walk through this, and Kevin, help me walk through this, because if Dad could be all of these things, this would be a really good dad.
Gosh, yeah, jeez.
Dad is patient.
Yeah, Dad is kind.
Yeah. Patience and kindness is huge coming from a male.
I was just going to say that. Like, sometimes we do weird things where we ascribe, men are strong and women are kind and men are, it's like, no, love is these things. And the Bible says God is love. And so this is what we're supposed to be. And I struggle, when you were asking earlier, what are the things you struggle with? Patience is probably my number one thing.
Yeah, but I see you struggle with it, but you are struggling with it because you want to be patient. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Dad is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. They don't see Dad envying the nicer car, the better house. They see Dad teaching contentment. This is what we have, and this is who we are, and not being arrogant with the people serving the food, not being arrogant about people that work for him, and not being rude. Dad does not insist on his own way, is not irritable or resentful. And wow.
Yeah.
Men struggle with
yes,
these
he
things.
is.
Dad doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. And I know in so many households, you men have raised your kids this way. Look, if you blew it, just tell me the truth. If you tell me the truth, you'll be in a lot less trouble.
It's not the crime, it's the cover-up.
Yeah. And truth is such an important thing between a father and a child. But it's also important then that you tell them the truth about when you blew it.
Yeah.
And that's where my dad always struggled was, well, I'm the dad, so you're the one that has to tell the truth. I don't have to admit my faults.
And when it comes to telling the truth about something that's hard or scary or confusing, like my wife and I always talk about how we'll have these moments where there's like a really cool conversation we have with one of our kids because they felt comfortable talking to us about something that freaked them out or so weird. And especially with all the stuff you worry about with your kids, like, when they're in situations that you're not in and you're hoping that they're safe and that the other adults or kids in their life have similar values and aren't going to mess them up. The only way you're ever going to hear about those things is if they feel safe enough with you to talk about something that feels like scary or new or whatever. I may be on. And so we always talk about how we earn those hard conversations or those good conversations, 6 months ahead of time because you don't know when they're going to come.
Love, Dad bears all things, Dad believes all things, Dad hopes all things, Dad endures all things. Now, this is where men are strong. You carry the family on your shoulders, and you want to believe the best, you want to hope for the best. And men can teach endurance in a male way that's very, very healthy.
Yeah, it's the husbands lay down your lives for your wives thing.
Love never ends, and then he goes on to talk about all the things that will end, but love never fails. All right, guys, we're going to put you into one more discussion group, and then we're going to wrap things up with, we're going to pray over you. Here are your discussion questions. What good things did your dad model for you? What's the best advice your father ever gave you? What do you wish he had taught you that you had to learn on your own instead? What wisdom do you hope you have passed on to your children? And then talk about your grandchildren and what you hope they're learning from you. Ready, go.
During our planning meeting last month, one of the things that we got input for, and we immediately cottoned to it because we loved the idea, was more testimonies. If you remember, we had Chris and Roy gave us our inaugural testimonies, at least in this calendar year. And this year we have Tony and Matt Sobey here, father and son. And Matt, I cornered the other day. He had his little boy Cipriano in his arms outside of Mass, trying to make it quiet for the rest of you to enjoy your worship. And somehow that led to an arm twisting to do a testimonial, a storytelling. And this is where it really helps for this to be a friendly audience, because I know it's unnerving to stand up and expose yourself like this. Right before we make that transition, I want to remind everybody that we'll have this recording on this nice camera here on the stand available probably within 24 hours, 36 hours. The Zoom recording is available as soon as I hit pause. Oh, and Steve wants you to take your persimmons, or what are those?
Yeah, they're persimmons.
Persimmons, yeah.
Please take them home, leave them out on the counter, and they'll be great for weeks.
Yeah, those will last for weeks. Okay, so I know Pastor Madsen and I decided that the end of the table discussion was the end of his presentation, but let's give him a hand. And Kevin came out of nowhere and nailed the opening prayer. He sacrificed to be here tonight. He had another engagement, and then he came up here and gave us some of the best extemporaneous thoughts I would love to ever hear from my 37-year-old. Yeah, in fact, if you're for rent, I'd like to take you on the road. Okay, without further delay, Matt Sobey. Yay! Courage! Courage!
All right, I might as well. All right, well, I prepared a very long speech, and I have it memorized. Well, if the aide's here, a 17-page speech. But I'm going to forget that, because I heard some pretty good words tonight, and also my dad's sitting right over there, so I didn't prepare anything necessarily. I've been thinking a lot since Jim and Steve had asked me to do this. I'm going to kind of free flow it. I've been told to keep it short, so I thought I was getting paid by the word. I guess not. So talking about fatherhood, and I'm here because I have a father. I'm also a father. I have a 6-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old son, and I can say that going through the fatherhood experience of only 6 years so far, and only 2 kids, and my parents raised 4, and I'm pretty impressed with the fact that we didn't get thrown out much earlier. And nobody really, I would say, your kids aren't born with a guide. There's no manual, and I'm realizing now that, what my dad did, I'm hearing, it's not, what really stuck with me is, it's not quality time, it's quantity time. And that's what I know I got when looking at my friends and how they were raised and what they received from their parents. And I can say some things that I received and I looked at as I saw mom and dad were together. What is it now? 56 years? And, yeah. So, yeah, that's a testimony there that'll stick with me right there. That's 56 years of dedication. Dad is an engineer, and he wasn't over. I was hearing him talk tonight about Grandpa Sobey, and a lot of similarities. He was not overbearing with us. He didn't hit us over the head, and say you're going to pray, but you're going to go to church. But my mom and dad, my dad went, and that's what I saw. It was every Sunday we're going to church. Every meal we prayed together. We read the Bible book. We read the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis, and I even brought one here. These things are older than me, these arch books, and we still have them in our house. Some of them, I think some of them disappeared, but I was looking at the copyright on this, and this thing is older than I am. And I'm starting to read them to my kids. And I'm really grateful that for all the time that Dad spent with me. We spent time underneath a lot of cars, restoring cars, or just oil changing them. And I don't know how I'm going to do it with my kids, because these days you look at it sideways and the car falls apart, and that's a $5,000 bill. So I did see patience, a lot of patience. We're talking about that I didn't see. Never really got angry at me. There was discipline, and probably more discipline than you can give your child these days. Now I heard a parent. We were at I was at a Kaiser, and the kid was acting up. Back in the day, I would have gotten smacked, and that's the way it is. And I'm probably grateful for that, because I probably deserved the smack. But the only thing that father could say to his kid was, if you don't stop acting out, I'm going to take away your iPad. And that was it. That was kind of like, and I thought to myself, God, that's the extent of control that father has on his kid. Of course, that's a snapshot in time. But I also know that I learned a lot of respect for people. I learned a lot of respect by watching my dad also respect other people. I never saw him get angry at another. I'll say there's one time. I do remember this one time, and it stuck with me because it was one time. We were actually at a Mountain Mike's years ago, and it seemed like everyone around us was getting served this pizza, and we weren't getting pizza. And Dad stood up and yelled, and he went like this, "Where's our pizza?" And I remember just being shocked, because he didn't cuss, didn't swear. That would have been me. I would have cussed, but he didn't. And we got served, but I just remember there was like that one time. It was kind of like it was I don't know. It was impressive, and it stuck with me all the time, because even working on cars and having the bloody hands and the slipped wrench and the bloody knuckles, I didn't hear or see too much impatience. He was just a calm, steady hand, I would say, the whole time. He taught me, got me introduced in photography, and that's what we did a lot of photography together. Matter of fact, maybe to their chagrin, that's what I ended up majoring in college, photojournalism, and actually was employed for a while as a commercial photographer. So, still have some of those early cameras that we used together. I can still work on cars. Even my daughter says, "Daddy, how come you can fix stuff?" And I have to tell her, "Well, it's because Grandpa taught me how to fix stuff, and so I can take it apart and I can actually put it back together in a logical manner." I know that I for a while, for probably after college, I kind of came away from the church for a while, and my dad would remind me, say, "Hey, how's your walk? How's your walk with the Lord?" Or that's why I'm here. That's why I'm back with this Men of Faith group. Primarily because my dad he invited me to go. I didn't know about this group, and so one of the main Bible verses that still is stuck with me that he told me is this Philippians 4:13, right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so I am remembering that on a daily basis when I'm dealing with my kids and trying to stay calm around my wife. So I'm trying to remember these things as I'm raising my family, remembering how my dad was, spending time, took us camping, took me running in the morning. And I also remember saying, Dad, how do you I would ask him, because I am still in the learning stage of being a father. And I don't sleep at night. I wake up tired. I go to work. I come home, I'm tired. And I would say, how do you exercise? And he would say, well, I would get up at 5 in the morning and I'd go for my run. And then I'd go to work. And then I would come home because he said I didn't want to steal any time away from the family. And I still, to this day, I don't think I have that kind of, dedication yet is the word, because I can't wake up that early. But I think there was something else driving him, really. I think it was just dedication to being with the family, spending time with us. And so I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for still having these little arch books, and for Pop's always saying, I call him the tank, because he's kind of like a tank. I mean, you can do whatever, say whatever, and he's always there. And he is very, very, I don't know how I want to say this, he's very Russian Polish, very, very steady hand. And so I've always been grateful for that. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you. God bless. All right.